G'day folks, it's Maro here. Welcome back for another exciting adventure into case law. Today's case is an interim reinstatement case, a really interesting discussion and a really interesting kind of law. This case, FJS in Health New Zealand, is about a surgeon who essentially says, I should get my job back before we make the final decision. So first off, a little bit about interim reinstatement. It's an unusual wee beastie. Basically, interim reinstatement is a request by an employee to get their job back for an interim period. What that usually means is the period before the substantive court case. So what normally happens is the event occurs, a person loses their role, they then the next week make an urgent application to the courts and say, I would like my job back for an interim period for a while. That while being until we hear the substantive case, and then when we have the substantive case, I can make an application for permanent returning of my job, i.e. permanent reinstatement. I can keep my job forever, ever. Most of the time, that interim reinstatement is going to last somewhere between 3 and 6 months, because it takes about 3 to 6 months for the time to go from your application for an authority hearing until the actual authority hearing. So it's for that bit that you're applying for an interim reappointment. In this case, the story involves a surgeon who moves to a regional hospital to act as a head of department type role, initially on a fixed term, and that fixed term keeps on rolling over 4 or 5 times over the course of 2 to 3-ish years. There are, however, at the same time that this occurs the final time, a suggestion that this particular doctor may have been bullying some of the staff. So as a result of that, arguably, depending on which side of the case you sit, the employer declines ever so politely to offer a further extension of the fixed term and says, actually, we've hired this other person in this other job, which now fulfills all the needs we have. We've got no other spaces or places, so your fixed term comes to an end for that reason. Obviously, the employee's position is that actually you've got these allegations, they're not proven, you're taking this out against me, for want of a better term, by taking this other role and connecting that to this one, and then telling me, thanks, but no thanks, I don't need to be here anymore. The authority has a listen to all of this and essentially says this: on the balance of everything, looking at all of this, it comes to the conclusion that, yeah, there probably is a reasonable argument to say you've extended the fixed term enough times to make this permanent, and we're pretty clear that this job is a challenging one. The person's moved here, the balance of probabilities, the balance of convenience probably does err on the side of the employee, so we will, in fact, grant the interim reinstatement. Now, interestingly enough, the employer also counters with, look, we've got some concerns about behaviour in the workplace. Our staff won't really accept this. This looks like an incompatible decision. It's not really going to work for us. To which the authority says, well, you know what? You can actually manage that doing some other stuff in your business as you need to, and you've obviously got your rights and your obligations as an employer to be able to exercise some judgment and some, if necessary, oversight and management in those sorts of issues, or if those problems arise. So that's not going to get you over the threshold today, and the interim reinstatement is in fact applied. Pretty unusual to see an interim reinstatement case succeed, pretty unusual to see one go this far, but I think it's a really clear message for us as employers that when people really rely on what we do in terms of moving, for example, cities, or it's a big and important role, and we're making what the court might consider a contribution by continuing to extend this person but not really potentially acknowledging the fact that it might be a real job, a permanent job, then we're likely setting ourselves up to have that interim reinstatement more likely than not happen, because it feels like that's a more, if you will, justice-like outcome on the facts. So you need to be really careful about how you manage those circumstances, and be aware that interim reinstatement, whilst rare, and much rarer than it used to be, is still a live issue, still something that employees can ask for, and clearly as a result of this case, still something that employees can receive. Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, it's actually and as always a pleasure. Good luck out there, and we'll see you guys again soon. Cheers.